Yeah, so we're gonna send out the recording for this event sometime next week, so be a little bit patient on that. Normally we get them out a little bit quicker, but there's lots of events this week. Want to make sure we get all the information in there for y'all. I want to give everybody an official welcome. Thank you so much for being here today. If you've joined us at any of our other panels this week, thank you for coming back. This is going to be a really great and inspiring conversation with our panelists. So yeah, this morning's discussion is focused on entitled Advancing Equity and Justice Throughout Affordable Housing Initiatives. So we're going to be exploring the integral role of affordable housing in promoting racial and social justice within our communities. And we do have a couple of sponsors for today's event. BCRA, Chase Bank, and Bronner are all sponsors for this event. And we would also like to extend a special thank you to our titled sponsor, U.S. Bank. I would like to start with the land acknowledgement. We gratefully honor and acknowledge that we rest on the traditional lands of the Puyallup people. The Puyallup people have lived on this land since the beginning of time. They're still here today. They live, work, raise their children, take care of their communities, and continue to practice their traditional ways. We recognize that this land acknowledgement is just one small step to true allyship and commit to the uplifting of voices, experiences, and histories of Indigenous peoples and of this land and beyond. We want to acknowledge the histories of dispossession and forced removal and reflect on this history in ways that honor the memory of the dispossessed and keep a committed mindset to the cause of social justice in Indigenous peoples. So for today, this is day 3 of 5 for Affordable Housing Week in Pierce County. Woo! Thank you for joining us at any of our other events. We've got lots of other events this week. I will put this link in the chat. Most of you have probably interacted with this link already, but here it is again. This will tell you all the events for the whole week. It'll let you register for them, give you some more information about them. So this morning's panel is going to be a panel style. It's going to be a panel style discussion. First, I'm gonna briefly introduce who we have on our incredible panel today, and then each one of them is going to have about 15 minutes to speak about their work and how they do it, what they're facing, what they're looking at. And I will be prompting each of our panelists with questions. So we won't have any slideshows today. It's just going to be a discussion with questions. And so when you have questions, we're going to have time after each panelist has had time to speak, time to open it up for everybody to answer or ask questions and create a discussion. So feel free to hold those questions and put them in the chat when the time is ready, or when we have discussion time, just raise your hand and we'll get to you. And quickly, before we start to dive into the conversation with our esteemed panelists, I'd like to just take a quick moment to introduce myself and our organization. My name is Casey Twiggs, and I am the membership coordinator for the Affordable Housing Consortium, and I am thrilled to be your host today. We're a nonprofit membership-based agency, and we provide public education, advocacy, and support for the expansion of affordable housing throughout Pierce County. One way that we do this is by educating the public on the need for affordable housing, by hosting discussions, virtual discussions, just like this one, special meetings, and collecting data to share with the public on housing needs and local policy. We also advocate at the state and local levels for policies and funding that will support the creation of more affordable housing and bolster the work of our members. So with about 60 dedicated members ranging from housing developers to individual advocates, our organization tirelessly works to foster communities that have healthy access to affordable homes. And so our consortium recognizes that affordable housing is not just about providing shelter. It's about addressing systemic injustices and creating pathways to equity for marginalized communities. Tacoma, in its rich diversity, serves as a microcosm for the broader challenges and opportunities we face in advancing housing justice. Historical injustices such as redlining and housing discrimination continue to cast long shadows over our communities, perpetuating racial disparities in housing access and affordability. These disparities have tangible impacts, from wealth disparities to neighborhood segregation and limited economic opportunities, particularly for Black and Hispanic households. And despite being one of the most racially diverse cities in Washington, Tacoma struggles with the deep-seated inequalities. Black households in particular face significant challenges with the lowest median incomes compared to other racial groups, and high levels of segregation as well. But amidst these challenges, there are opportunities for change. By prioritizing fair and equitable housing policies and initiatives, we can dismantle systemic barriers, foster inclusive communities, and advance racial and social justice. So today we're going to explore the issues in depth, hearing from experts who advance or advocate for equity and justice through affordable housing and other services. And together we can work towards creating a future where every individual has access to safe, affordable, and dignified housing. So let me briefly introduce our panelists for today. We have Khuu Orvold, lead managing broker at the Tacoma Urban League, Adria Buchanan, executive director of the Fair Housing Center of Washington, and Aimee Khuu, executive director of the Tacoma Community House. We're really, really thankful to have all three of you here. I believe, Khuu, you are up first.
Good morning, everyone. So my name is Khuu Orvold. I'm a managing broker, which means that I'm licensed in the state of Washington to help folks buy and sell real estate. My role at the Tacoma Urban League is actually a volunteer role where I partner with the Urban League on all things housing. So if you're familiar with the Tacoma Urban League, or the Urban League in general, which is a national organization, we have 5 initiatives, which is housing, health, education, employment, and social justice. And so my role in housing is any sort of housing related issue that a community member is experiencing, they'll reach out to me and say, hey, you know what, Khuu can help you. And so my role looks like I teach monthly homebuyer classes every second Saturday. So we have community members that come in that are looking to purchase a home. A lot of our community members are not able right now. There's some sort of barrier that they're facing or experiencing where they have to wait. So sometimes they're setting a goal for themselves. We've had folks that are actively experiencing homelessness come to our classes, just really trying to set a goal for themselves. We've also had folks that are recently out of incarceration. We had one gentleman that was actually reporting to incarceration, again, setting a goal for himself in the future. My role is just really to help the community members learn what it looks like to purchase their first house. We hold their hand every step of the way, and it's really a rewarding experience because we know that we're changing the lives not only for that particular individual, but a lot of times their family as well, because I have a lot of folks that are not just first time home buyers. We have a lot of folks that are first generation. And so I recently helped a gentleman. He's one of 8 children, and he's the first one in his family to buy a house. And so telling him, hey, you know what, you just got your offer accepted is one of the most incredible experiences. He made me cry with his reaction. And so that's why I love what I do at the Tacoma Urban League. A couple other things that we do. We have home maintenance classes. And what that really came out of is back in like 2016, Tacoma, the Hilltop and East Tacoma were really being sent out across the country as great places to come and flip houses. And what that was doing was that was displacing a lot of historically community members that's their world. That's the only community that they knew. And so what we did was we got together and we said, how can we help our community members not be preyed on by these investors? And so what we did was we thought, well, what if we did community free classes that help the community stay in their house, empower them to do the work on their houses, and really just help them, guide them to stay in their house. Yes, I am that real estate broker that is trying to help folks stay in their house as well. It's not just all about buying and selling, but it's also, like I said, just really trying to help the community stay in the house, because I am an African-American woman and my community being preyed on is incredibly heartbreaking to me. And so that's really what our role is. We also work with Windermere Professional Partners and Windermere Abode, and we are trying to get more people of color into not only real estate, but also real estate related fields. And so we have sessions where we really just kind of present with various roles in real estate. We show the community, here's what you can do. I also mentor new brokers, and then I maintain an advocate. So like if a community member calls and says, maybe this investor is asking me to sell my house. A lot of times they're not giving, it's pennies on the dollar to what the actual value of the home is. And so really my role is to just kind of run comps for them and make sure that what they're being offered is fair. We have had several issues with justice when it comes to housing. It's really heartbreaking to hear that we've had some issues with eminent domain where the county or the city has decided that, we need a portion of this person's land, an African American community member, we need a portion of their land in order to do something that will benefit the public. And so I've had to do referrals for attorneys. We've had issues where, unfortunately, even in 2024 is not different from historical issues that we've had in the Black community, where folks have decided that, here's a person of color, and we've gotten together as a community and decided that we don't want you in our neighborhood. And so we've actually had someone that, as sad as it is, the neighbors went around and signed a petition, knocked on our door and said, we as a community have voted you out of our neighborhood. And she's a homeowner. And so these are real issues that community members are facing. And every day when I hear these stories, it really just encourages me to continue to do this work and understand how important this work is, because in my mind, I think that everyone has a right to homeownership if they want it. I understand that some community members don't want to be homeowners, and that's understandable. But if you want to own a home, I think that it's only right and fair that you have the ability to own a home. So thank you so much.
Great. Awesome. So I've got some questions for you. Yeah, so are you finding that in the economic climate that we're in, obviously it's really tough for people to buy a home right now for lots of reasons, interest rates and such. Are you finding that people are still seeking to buy homes? I mean, you said that you're even having people who are experiencing homelessness or about to be incarcerated, or, making a plan for home ownership super early, but even people that are ready to do it, are you seeing any reduction in that seeking aspect, or is it more, I guess, what do you have to say about that in terms of where we are economically as a country?
I think that there's definitely a lot of interest in purchasing a home. I think that in the Black community, we've seen trauma so much, whether it not be us, but maybe it's our parents or maybe grandparents. I know as a young child, I was raised by a single Black father, and my father was doing what's called a rent to own type purchase. Mm-hmm. And for 2 years, he paid on time each payment. And then when it came down to it, the woman selling the house, she saw my dad's face, and suddenly the house was no longer for sale. And so as a young child, like seeing that experience, that hit me a little differently than most people that don't have that experience, to understand where it's like, we've lived here for many years. We go to school, we have friends, we have, this is our lives. And suddenly we can't live here anymore. And that doesn't make sense to me at 8 years old. And so that's one thing that kind of stuck with me as far as like when I'm working with community is I have that experience. And so I'm able to understand where someone's coming from. I do feel absolutely that there is an interest. I think that the biggest challenge in the Black community right now is the affordability. When it comes to, we had COVID kind of opened up our state to, you don't have to go into work. A lot of folks now work from home. And so with that put pressure throughout the state and kind of increased housing prices because folks from maybe King County that sold their house for cash were able to move down to Pierce County, were able to move to Aberdeen, were able to move all over the state and pay cash or pay over appraised price. Whereas if you're just purchasing a house, you're not able to finance over the appraised price. And so you're really capped off there. And so these cash buyers and the folks that were willing to pay over the appraised price were really pushing out a lot of our community members. And so folks were having to move further south or out to areas where, if you think of this is our world, right? And I live on South Hill. I know South Hill. If I want to go to the store, I know where the store is. But when you think about if I can't afford to live here and I'm getting pushed down to a different county or a different area, I have to recreate my entire life. Are my friends, are my family going to come visit me? And so I think that that's really a challenge. And when folks can't stay in the areas that they're accustomed to and where their world is, it's really hard to keep that dream alive to purchase a home.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you for that. And you did mention, not only your own experience, but, the whole process of, you mentioned appraisals. And I'm sure most people in the room know what that means. But I'm not going to assume. Do you want to talk about the issues around appraisal, of homes and the racial injustices around that, the representation issues and that sort of thing, just in case people don't really know what that might mean? It was new to me about a year ago, so.
Absolutely. And so the issues with appraisals is actually nothing new. Um, Essentially what the appraiser is, they're supposed to be a neutral third party that's paid for by the buyer essentially, and they work for the loan officer, or excuse me, the lender, in case there's some sort of default. So if the house goes into foreclosure or something like that. The issue is that there's some bias. And this is not an isolated incident. There's multiple stories. If you literally enter into Google appraisal bias, there's a plethora of stories. There's someone that is pretty high up in the community that she's a loan officer. Her family owns a real estate brokerage. She's also the victim of an appraisal bias. And luckily she has been an underwriter. So she understands, she has a cousin that's an appraiser. So she knew what was going on and she was able to call it out. But not everybody understands when it's just, my house is valued less because I look like I do, or there's these pictures on my wall, or there's African art or something along those lines. And so what happens is a lot of times when this happens to someone and they feel an injustice, what they'll do is they'll do what's called a whitewash of their house. And so I've heard of folks having like a white neighbor or a white friend in their home when the appraiser gets there and say, act like it's their house. Suddenly the value shoots right up. And so really with the appraisal industry, the biggest concern is that the bar to become an appraiser is so high, right? So you have all these folks that, and not saying every appraiser's biased, but the folks that are there that have been appraisers for a while, they've been allowed to just do business as usual. When you have a bar, and I started studying for my appraisal license a year ago. It's literally the worst thing that's ever happened to me. And even as a managing broker in real estate, I saw this need. And so to be an appraiser, you have to have either a bachelor's degree or a long list of classes completed at community college level. You have to do minimum of like 1,500 hours to be able to be an appraiser by yourself. And then there's a 2,000 hour, and then there's higher levels of hours that you have to do in order to get your appraisal license. And you also have to have a mentor. And so as a managing broker, what delayed my getting my appraisal is actually finding someone that was willing to take me on as a mentor. And when you have that bar, how do you expect to change anything in the industry when you have these bars set? And as a person of color that's already historically, like maybe I'm the sole support for my family, or, in my situation, like I have older relatives that, we have to help financially because they, it's just how it is sometimes in the community. And so when you're in that situation, it's extremely difficult to think, okay, now I have to do 1,500 hours and live my life and keep my day job in order to do this industry, in order to try to change this industry. And that's one reason why I'm working on my license. And it's a slow, I do have a life, I do have a job, I do have all this other stuff going on, but then I'm also trying to get my 1,500 hours done. And so it's extremely challenging, but that's my effort to try to change the industry so that once I become an appraiser, then other people I can help train, and we can start to change the stigma with the industry.
You've got a lot on your plate, Corey.
Yeah, I need to learn to start saying no.
It is a beautiful thing, but it's hard to do. It's hard to do when you're a passionate person,
Thank you.
Well, that was really, really informative. I have more questions for you, but my introduction was a little short, so I don't want to make you answer more questions for longer than I told you would have to speak. So we will have I do got some more questions for you. So when we've got the larger opportunity for questions, I'll ask them then. Thank you so much, Corey, for what you do, your insight, your experience, and your passion for your work. So we are going to go to our next panelist, Adria Buchanan, Executive Director for the Fair Housing Center of Washington. We're really, really happy to have her here. She's a rock star in the space, puts on some really great workshop events that I've attended. Yeah, really, really a connector in the community as well. So yeah, Adria, if you want to start by just introducing, who you are, what you do, maybe some of your background, and what the Fair Housing Center is all about.
Sure. Thanks, Casey. And good morning, everyone. Like Casey said, my name is Adria Buchanan, and I've been the Executive Director of the Fair Housing Center since 2019, so just over 5 years. And our agency, we've been around since the 80s, and we serve all of Western and Central Washington. So we serve 23 counties, from the north to the southern border. And really, we are a civil rights organization, and we work to prevent, mitigate, and eliminate unlawful housing discrimination, and really promote inclusive communities. That's the other part of our mission, and I'll talk about kind of how that plays out for us. In terms of the civil rights aspect, we really are looking to enforce the Fair Housing Act. We want to be able to kind of suss out and destroy housing discrimination. And we do that through investigating allegations of discrimination that are brought to us by the community. So individuals may approach us if they've been in some of the situations that Corey talked about, whether it be with, home appraisal, or, they're looking to say they're purchasing a condo, or they're looking to sell a condo and they're having some issues with their HOA or with their, COA board. So I'll talk about reasonable accommodations and modifications a little bit later, but discrimination that's happening when there are buyers involved or sellers involved in housing transactions, those are things that we help with. But the majority of our clients are renters, and so people will come to us if they feel like, I have a Section 8 voucher and I can't find anyone that will rent to me, or the landlord is denying my application based on some criminal history, and they feel like there are so many parts to a housing transaction. So even when someone's applying for an apartment, it could be discrimination in the advertisement that they see for that apartment. It could be in the lack of communication that they receive from the leasing agent when they go to apply or ask follow-up questions. It could be in the terms and conditions that they get for how much that apartment costs, or what the move-in fees are. It could be them requesting a reasonable accommodation or modification. And so for folks with disabilities, they have additional protections under the Fair Housing Act, and they can ask for an emotional support animal, and for those fees to be waived. They can have a live-in caregiver if they have the correct documentation. They can have parking spots that are closer to their unit that allow them greater accessibility. They can have different modifications in their unit that allow them to get in and out more easily. So there are lots of things that are involved when someone is looking for housing and trying to secure housing. And so we help with every step of that process if they feel like they're being treated differently because of some aspect of their identity. So under the Federal Fair Housing Act, there are 7 protected classes. And then in Washington, there are additional protections at the state level. And then depending on which municipality someone is in, they may have even more protections. And so we really stay abreast of what those protections are, and making sure that we're able to enforce the law as much as possible where that person is experiencing the what they believe to be unfair treatment. So that's kind of the first thing, is just investigating the allegations of discrimination. They'll come to us, we'll help them gather their evidence, and we'll file a formal complaint with either HUD or the Washington State Human Rights Commission. And then we'll serve as a liaison in that process to make sure that they're being well represented, information is getting properly conveyed, and that we are helping them to be made whole if depending on what they think that means. So sometimes that's monetarily, sometimes that's additional training for staff or other types of repercussions. Sometimes it means demanding that the housing provider run ads in a particular area or update their policies and procedures. So there are lots of different enforcement mechanisms that we have at our disposal when it comes to that. The other thing that we do is testing. So testing, it's like secret shopping. We have testers that we've worked with, some for years and years, some who are newer to our process. But these individuals, they are spread throughout our service area, so all of Western and Central Washington. And their job, the way that we work with them, is that they pose as renters. And so they go into different communities, and they interact with housing providers and their leasing agents, and they report back to us what their experience is like trying to obtain housing based on the profile that we've given them. And so we can glean a lot of insight from that experience and from their report, and we compare their experiences with others who've done the same thing. So I won't go into too many of the details of how we do it, but I will say that we learn a lot from our testing, and we've learned that housing providers are becoming increasingly savvy, but the ways in which people are being discriminated against are becoming increasingly harder to mitigate. It's becoming increasingly hard to fight the discrimination because it's happening in ways that aren't necessarily like face to face. We're seeing a lot of algorithmic bias, which is in the software that's being used to determine whether or not someone is eligible for the housing. We're seeing just lack of response from housing providers, and so it's getting harder and harder to say, without a shadow of a doubt, that this person is being discriminated against. But that's what makes the work interesting. It makes us have to do our jobs better and to learn more about what's happening in the market. I know some of you are aware that there's been some news articles about even the pricing software that different housing providers are using to set the rate for apartments. So looking into things like that, like I said, it's not just someone goes up to a leasing office and gets denied to their face. It's a lot of redirecting someone to apply online and then having their application denied online, not totally understanding why, and then having to dig deeper to figure out to figure out the reason. So that's our testing. We do testing as part of our normal contracted work with the federal government, and then we also will have contracts with private municipalities to run testing in their area. So for example, like King County and Pierce County, they've asked us to do testing in the past where they want to look at particular protected classes, or they want to look at particular areas within their municipality. And so we'll run tests to give them that insight, and they'll use that to inform their housing policy. So we're appreciative of the opportunity to collaborate with municipalities in that way.
Can I ask you a quick clarifying question, Adria?
Sure.
So the testing that you're referring to, is that the same as the fair housing assessments?
No,
No, those
no.
are different. Okay, okay. Just wanted to, for my own.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So, I'll talk about that next. So, the other part of our work is around research and, reports. So HUD had a previous rule around affirmatively furthering fair housing and mandated that municipalities create either an analysis of impediments to fair housing or an assessment of fair housing report every 5 years. And that report is the way that report works is that you look at housing data, you look at different trends, and then you assess what the barriers are to someone being able to access fair and affordable housing. And then the municipality is supposed to work over the next 5 years to close out those barriers. And then, a new report is done, and then the process continues. And whatever wasn't closed out from the last report gets put onto the next one, and so on. So in the past, we have been contracted to do those kinds of reports. So we would look at HMDA data, which is the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act data, looking at the number of applications that were received by a lender, what the denial and acceptance rates were across different protected classes. So based like race and sex, for example. I'm not sure if national origin is in there, but looking at the denial rates of potential borrowers and seeing if there are any disparities there. Also looking at what types of investments the bank has made in their footprint. So banks do have an obligation to lend in the areas where they have branches and to provide financial services. And so like in Pierce County and in Tacoma, I mean, there aren't that many banks. And so, especially if you look at, there a few credit unions have popped up, but in general, there aren't a lot of bank branches. And so thinking about, what's the impact of that on people's ability to obtain loans, small businesses and also, potential homeowners. So we look at HMDA data, we look at census data and ACS, American Community Survey data, seeing what are the proportions of homeowners to renters, how that's changed over time, what the average rents are and how that's changed over time, and really thinking about what actions can a municipality take to ensure that people have greater access to housing. So we do those reports also. And again, it's separate from our testing. We may include our testing data in those reports, but our testing is really focused on an individual's experience with the housing provider. And then we aggregate that. But in a given year, we may run probably somewhere between 100 and 150 tests throughout our service area. And then the last part of what we do is around training and education and outreach. So we do a lot of training for industry folks, so housing providers, realtors, people who are, property managers and otherwise interacting with clients who are looking for housing, whether it be rental housing or, again, realtors working with folks who are looking to purchase a home. Or sell their home. There are a lot of nuances to the Fair Housing Act, and I think one of the things we really want to see is just more education for people who are kind of in this. I would say that realtors, have been getting the brunt of the, you need more fair housing training, and I'm sure Corey can speak to that, but but aside from realtors, there are lots of other people in the housing industry that I think would benefit from additional training. And so, for example, like HOA and COA board members, there's no requirement for them to have any type of training, whether it be the Fair Housing Act or anything else. So that's kind of a subset of the population that we really want to see take on more responsibility for understanding the laws, because they do play a powerful role in someone's experience, in housing. So from a policy perspective, that's something that we think is really important. But yeah, in general, we're just here to advocate and help folks. When it comes to reasonable accommodations and modifications, we'll often go to the client's home, really see what they're experiencing, take pictures, do measurements, and then we'll write up a letter and really negotiate on their behalf with the housing provider to get them the accommodations that they need. So sometimes it's a ramp or closer parking spot. Other times it's working with the housing authority to allow them to have more time to turn in their documents or renew some certifications and things like that. Understanding that people have all different types of disabilities that present themselves in different ways. And so in order for people to have equal access and enjoyment of their housing, they may need several different accommodations or modifications to make that work. So we try to just get people to understand that, just because you may not need anything extra to enjoy your home, that doesn't mean that other people don't. There are a lot of different accommodations that really have helped people quite a bit. And so we just want to make sure that when we're talking about housing, people understand it has to be truly inclusive.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, in one of the workshops that I attended with you, is where I learned about a lot more about inclusive design. Inclusive design in terms of, just the little tiny things that can be added, or a home can be, counters can be lowered just a little bit to make it accessible for kids, for people with disabilities, anybody,
Right.
It's really fascinating work, and it's something that I wasn't really aware of, and I appreciate you bringing people together to educate us on that. That was really, really great for me personally.
Yeah, thank you. I think, universal design is something that we're definitely trying to push. And I think, the more that we learn about kind of the inadequacies of the Americans with Disabilities Act and addressing the needs of people who have a range of disabilities today, we're seeing universal design as more of an answer and more able to fill the gap of those needs. So like you said, a lower counter, lower, light switches, all those considerations can be beneficial to people with disabilities, but also to people who have a range of a range of needs. So the more that we can create units that are universally designed, the less that we have to really market things as, ADA or not ADA, or, say that they're ADA when they're really not, or have people mismatched to where someone who doesn't have any need for an ADA unit is living in an ADA unit, where someone who really could use those modifications isn't able to find a unit available. So if we can create things that are more universally designed, then we don't have to worry about that mismatch and people not having what they need.
Mm-hmm. And they've gotten really, really creative with it. And, you wouldn't even know that it was, a design for potentially someone with a disability, because it's just makes sense. Thank you, Adria, for your work, for your, the way that you network, the way that you bring people together is really, really inspiring. And we appreciate the work that you do. And like I said to Corey, I don't want to make you speak for longer than I originally asked you to. So we'll move on to Aimee, but I do have a couple more questions for you as well. So if people in the audience, if you don't got your questions ready, I'm going to be having my own questions. So hope y'all have lots of questions for them. Thank you again, and we will have more questions for Adria at the end with our Q&A. We're going to move on to our third and final panelist of the morning, Aimee Khuu, Director of Tacoma Community House. Thank you so much for being here. I guess let's start with, just an overview of who is Aimee? What does Aimee do? What's your background, and maybe what brought you to Tacoma Community House, and what's the community house all about?
Sure. Thank you. Corey and Adria, I'm taking mad notes over here. I'm so grateful for the work that both of you are doing. And I think that there's a lot of need to get the work that you guys are doing out into the community and to our clients at TCH. So look, thank you for your presentations. So my name's Aimee Khuu. I am Executive Director of Tacoma Community House and the Reach Center, which some of you might be more familiar with the Reach Center. So I'll share a little bit about that and our integration there. But in a lot of ways, I developed my passion for this work through working with migrant farm working communities of the Skagit Valley up in the northern part of Washington State, the northwest part of Washington State. And I remember the first time I ever went to a migrant camp. For those of you who haven't been to a migrant camp, it might be, for me, what it was reminiscent of was Japanese internment camps. Very small plywood homes with tin roofs and sometimes windows and 2 bunk beds and a Bunsen burner and maybe 4 to 8 people living in each of those units. If you haven't been to a migrant camp, I really encourage you to. It's the way that our farm working communities here in Washington State live. And for me, as a 12-year-old, when I first encountered those, it blew my mind. Now here I am in a role working with migrant communities, and I can't say the situation is much better. So I'll share a little bit about that, but in some ways that's who I am, as someone who's been really formed by these experiences of working with migrant communities. My family is from Vietnam, and we're refugees, and so I have a real passion for immigrants and refugees, and I recognize that immigrants and refugees strengthen our community. They strengthen the culture of our communities. They strengthen our economy. They bring jobs. They develop businesses, and so I am a great advocate of our immigrant and refugee population. So I've worked for the past 10 years at Providence Health and Services, working in global health and in health equity. And I came to Tacoma about 16 months ago to lead Tacoma Community House and the Reach Center, and I couldn't be more thrilled. I'll share my screen as I share a little bit about who we are as an organization. But for those who aren't aware, Tacoma Community House has been in Pierce County, serving our migrant and immigrant population for the past 114 years. We have this lovely facility that I'm in right now, and if you're interested in coming and visiting for a tour, I would be delighted to share more about our work. But we are up on the hilltop. We've been on the same block for 114 years. We were founded as a Methodist settler house, serving the Italians and the Scandinavian population. But throughout that 114 years, we have evolved to meet the needs of the population that comes to our doors. And so you can imagine, in the 1970s, we were literally the organization that went out to the tarmac to meet the Vietnamese community, while California was saying, don't stop here, no refugees are welcomed here. Governor Dan Evans said, come to Washington State, and Tacoma Community House went out to meet them as they arrived in Washington State. With each wave of immigrant and refugee populations, we really evolve our programs and respond to that need. So with the Asian populations that came in the 1970s, the Latino communities, and right now with the Ukrainian and Afghani populations that have come into Washington State, looking for safe haven from war, violence, and persecution. Throughout that history, what we've recognized is, we don't necessarily have the skills and language competency to meet those needs. And so we develop our programs. We partner with the community to meet those needs. For example, right now we have 4 Ukrainian translators and staff within each of our programs. And we stand up unique programs that are going to be able to meet their needs. So United Way of Pierce County was started here, the Asian American Forum, and likewise the Reach Center. So the Reach Center was really formed to meet the needs of youth and young adults experiencing housing insecurity. And I'll just move for a moment to give you a little bit of an overview of those programs, but we really look at, we hire people with lived experience, we meet people's needs both around prevention, diversion, and then housing stability through rapid rehousing, and really making sure that we know the names of all of our youth and young adults who are experiencing housing insecurity and can put them on a path to housing stability. Across all of our programs, you see kind of a similar approach. You know, we look at the barriers, and as we sit here and talk about housing, there are so many systemic barriers around housing, poverty and neglect that our communities face, and then challenges in navigating systems. We deploy these programs around housing stability, employment, education services, legal immigration, and client advocacy to really address the inequity that our community faces and move them toward stability through first and foremost addressing their immediate needs, advocating for them, helping them then advocate for themselves and understand that they have agency as they navigate systems, and then move toward stability, resiliency, and their own civic engagement as kind of our long-term goals. That's a little bit about our agency. And I think, you know, speaking specifically to the housing concerns of our community, you know, I think there are many for youth and young adults who don't have a rental history, who might have a criminal record, or who might have arrest on file. Adria, there's a particular situation I was just talking about within my staff, a client who was arrested on the premises of their housing and were evicted, and yet there was actually no criminal claim that was filed. And so, you know, I believe that there's an element of discrimination in there, and that youth who finally was able to access housing is now back on the streets. Likewise, immigrants and refugees who come to our country without any rental history, without any you know, credit report that they can file, you know, they are not able to access housing, certainly not affordable housing in our communities. And so they, you know, are really in a place of struggling to be able to find adequate housing for them and their families, many of which are multifamily units. So a lot of challenges to our youth and young adults and refugee and immigrant populations. You know, we do not necessarily do that advocacy. We don't necessarily have the skills around that. So I'm really looking forward to partnership with folks who are interested on the call and with housing providers. We need more providers who are willing to provide affordable housing to these unique populations. And we're looking for creative solutions that might be able to move people into a place of stability for at least temporarily as they build their credit history. We're working with Lehigh right now and with church communities to see to it that people can pay a small amount and be able to build some of that rental history. But it's really quite challenging. Right now, if you look, you know, in the newspapers, you might see information about the refugee camp in Tacoma, where we have over 500 refugees who have come to our country for safe haven and are living in tents. I was there just 2 days ago meeting with Pastor Jan, who is, you know, looking for every solution she can find and just feeling really challenged by our housing market and the environment in which people who don't have work permits yet are, you know, in the legal proceedings to become asylum seekers, but are really on the streets. And to me, that is just a disgrace. You know, as someone who comes from a refugee family, I'm in shock and in awe that we have refugees who are living in tents, women and children who have nowhere to turn. And I know that we have a housing crisis within our own country, but I just can't help but believe that we can do much better. So I look forward to continued conversation with anyone on the call who might have ideas, motels that we might partner with, shared housing opportunities, or other creative solutions that I'm sure people on the line might have access to, and would love to have that conversation.
Thank you so much, Aimee. Yeah, you're in a very, very unique place in terms of housing, in terms of social and racial justice, and I don't think that it's something that a lot of people really think about. I mean, you think about when it's in the forefront of the news, or it's trending on social media and people are paying attention to it, but it's happening all the time, and it's not necessarily getting more and more smoothed out. It's getting, things around the world are just, they continue to blow up, and people have to find security for themselves. And we're one of the countries that really should be offering that. And thank you for your work.
Absolutely. It's a great point, Casey, that, we think of ourselves as a country that should be responding to it. And one of the families that I'm working with is from Afghanistan, and they fled the Taliban. And in the aftermath of us leaving Afghanistan, there are incredible challenges to the Afghani communities. He made his way to Brazil that offered a humanitarian visa, and basically walked and took buses for the next month to arrive in the United States, only to find that there really was no option for him when he arrived here. So stories, horrific stories of resilience and hardship that, I think that generally most of us on any given day, if you were to say, do you care about these issues? We do care about these issues. And yet I think that we feel very disempowered, and we don't know what those solutions look like. And I can't help but believe that through these consortiums, through these conversations, we can really come up with the right solutions for our community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if somebody is doing, the narrative sometimes is, well, you need to do it the right way, but even so, when individuals and entire families are coming, trying to do it the correct way and by the books, and they're still not taken care of, it's a massive gap, to put it lightly. I do have a quick question for you around, I guess, what could cities and counties, what could governments do? I know you talked about developer partnerships, people who are working in redeveloping hotels and motels, working on that kind of work, those kinds of developer housing partners you mentioned. But what about city or county folk? What could they do to support your work, make things easier for you, or help you get funding, or what?
Zoning laws,
Hmm.
being able to have, one of a church that wants to host refugees right now is not able to get the permission that they need to be able to have multifamilies in their church facility. And I think a lot of us can point to different types of zoning laws that are preventing ADUs or tiny homes or other types of creative solutions to address housing needs. Funding is always absolutely critical, and I think funding for programs, but also for apprenticeships. We have refugees who are coming. I have 3 dentists downstairs right now. We have 250 immigrants and refugees in our building a day. And we have 3 dentists who are not able to work as dentists here in our country. And just by being able to have pathways to employment, support for re-credentialing or credential recognition, paid opportunities for job shadowing. When refugees arrive to the United States, they have debt that they have to pay. That interest is accumulating after 90 days. And we're talking, about $10,000 for a family to come to the United States. We don't realize that refugees pay the cost of their visas and their travel fees and their travel expenses. So if we can do anything to help people get early employment, but not stagnate them by having them in entry-level roles when they're bringing dental degrees, medical degrees, engineering degrees, let's make sure that they're operating at the very top of their license for job security.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think I'd ever really thought about how expensive. I didn't think that is, I mean, that's a down payment on a house, just to find a secure country to set foot in is just wild to me. And I apologize for that sound. If everybody heard that, I don't know if anybody else has gotten these emergency alerts about the air quality. But I'm in Hilltop, so I don't know if anybody else is getting those, but a gas issue. Sorry about that. If that was a jarring sound, it was for me. Fixed and all clear. Thanks, Nicholas, because I'm getting another one. It's like the fourth one I've gotten today. Okay. Thank you so much, Aimee. I mean, you are uncovering I feel like I could sit here and ask you questions all day long, all three of you. And so we're going to step into the last part of this panel discussion. And yeah, this is the time for discussion. This is the time to raise your hand, put your questions in the chat, and pose questions to our panelists. We've got a lot of expertise in this room. So this is also a time, like Aimee was mentioning, we're looking for partnership. The reason that we're in this room partly is for education and partly is for connection. I mean, we're working on a serious group of issues, and it takes all of us to work together. So even if you're in the room and you just want to say, hey, Aimee, Corey, or Adria, that we want to maybe work with you, I'll make notes of that. I can connect you guys, anything like that. That's what we're here for. So we're here for questions, discussion, connection. And so anybody who's got a question, you just go for it. Take yourself off mute. Go ahead, Mark. If you're talking, I can't hear you.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
There you are.
I'm on my phone and I'm not familiar on how the buttons work with here. So my question is for you, Adria. With understanding of how busy you and your team are, approximately, how many cases or reports do you get about discriminatory housing, particularly across the board or even just in the rental market? And how much of that is, or how are those resolved? What is the normal way that you work with the concern of both parties and get it resolved, if you get it resolved?
Yes, good question. So I'll say that our agency, we get about between 500 and 600 calls a year of people with all sorts of housing issues. Out of those 600, about half, maybe a little more than half, maybe 350 are allegations of discrimination. However, for a variety of reasons, there is a very large drop-off between what people allege is discrimination and then complaints that actually get filed. So, and it's for a variety of reasons. Some people, their situation changes, or they're in such dire straits that it's no longer a priority for them to follow through with that particular complaint because they're just trying to secure housing. We saw that a lot during the pandemic, that there was a large drop in complaints reported because folks were just worried about whether or not they could literally stay in their home, and being able to pay rent. And so, and I'll answer your question, but before I say that, I will say that it's a policy of our agency that we can't help folks who are behind in rent. So because it's hard to allege that you're being discriminated against based on a protected class, that that you're being treated differently if at the same time you haven't paid your rent, right? So the lines are like a little bit blurrier now because there's so many different rent increases that are happening, but in general we find it very difficult to have a successful complaint if the person is behind in rent. So out of those about 300 or so allegations of discrimination that come to our office, I would say in any given year we're filing probably 10 to 15 complaints. And again, the reason for that is because people's phone numbers change. They're going through different transitions. They decide that they don't want the retaliation that could come from filing the complaint, so they withdraw their complaint. They don't have enough evidence. There are lots, sometimes they're able to settle it with their housing provider before it comes to the complaint filing period. So there are lots of different reasons, but it's still a huge drop off. So in any given year, we're filing about 10 complaints, and that involves collecting all of the evidence and really telling that chronological story of what's happened, and then going through that investigative process with them. So after we file the complaint, it goes to either HUD or the Washington State Human Rights Commission. It's assigned an investigator, and then that person will review all the evidence, and then they'll ask, what are the settlement terms? So the settlement terms could be that the client wants to be reimbursed for the time that they spent looking for a new apartment because they were denied or they were wrongfully evicted. They want reimbursement for lost wages, for travel time, gas money. Maybe there was a difference in rent that they had to pay at the new place versus the place that they were evicted from. So that could be something that they would ask for. In a situation involving a reasonable accommodation or modification, say that the housing provider didn't allow the service animal or the emotional support animal, and the client had to put that animal in some other, I don't know, like doggy daycare, doggy hotel or something, or they had to stay with somebody and they had to pay for that. They would ask to be reimbursed for that. There could be medical expenses that they accrued because of not having the emotional support animal. So maybe they spent more time going to the therapist or going to, some other health provider. In some cases, we're able to come to a number with the housing provider, and then that effectively stops the investigative process. So if there can be some agreement on what's going to make the client whole, then they won't go through the entire investigation. But if there is an agreement, then it will continue to go through the investigative process, and then there will be a cause or no cause finding that is issued. If it's a cause finding, then it can be referred to the Attorney General's office, or the Attorney General's office usually, and then it could result in further litigation. But we try not to get to that point. Other things that might be included in settlement terms would be additional training for the staff that were involved or the staff at the property. Officially the respondent in the case. Mandatory training. There could be some mandatory reviews of their policies, asking for them to update them depending on which violations were cited. It could also be that they have to agree to pay for testing. So they would have to agree to have their operations tested, you know, in a year or 6 months or whatever. And they, you know, again, they wouldn't know when that test was happening or anything, but they would get the results of that. And the Washington State Human Rights Commission would also get the results of that to see if they were still in violation of the law or if they had updated their processes to be in compliance. So yeah, the settlement terms could call for all sorts of things. It could also be, again, like running ads. So if a housing provider had some discriminatory advertisements, then the settlement terms might say, you know, you have to run, you know, so many ads within this particular geographic area over this period of time to counter the previous discriminatory advertising that they were doing. So it just kind of depends on the details of the case, but we do try to settle a lot of things. And I will say that the investigative process can take quite a long time. Now it's probably between a year and a half to 2 years. And so even though we only file, you know, between 10 and 15 cases a year, there are still cases from previous years that we're working on. So that we do that in addition to, you know, talking to clients, trying to address all the other housing issues that they're having, referring them to the right place, and trying to get their reasonable accommodations met.
Thank
Thank you.
you for that, very detailed, and thank you for all that you do. I know that you deal with a lot of stressful complaints that have huge impacts on their family, and I know that you do a great job doing it, and I'm grateful that you're doing it, and your team.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, it's nice that we also have a lot of good housing partners, you know, including, you know, Spinnaker. It's a lot easier to avoid. It's much easier to avoid complaints if a housing provider is having open dialogue with us and we can think through what good solutions are for the client, as opposed to, you know, interacting with folks who are pretty set in their ways and aren't interested in hearing what we have to say, or in making accommodations that they think are going to be too costly or too costly or just not feasible. And so anytime that we can enter into a conversation with a housing provider and actually have some collaboration, it usually works out better for everybody.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your question, Mark, and your detailed answer, Adria. That was very informative. I'm gonna. Does anybody else have any questions that you want to raise your hand and ask and come off mute? We also have the chat. Even if you just have like a comment too, or you know what I always say, sometimes I don't ask questions in a group like this because I don't exactly know what the question is I'm trying to get to. But we can help you get there if you've just got some thoughts or whatever. We can help you get to formulating your right question and get you in the right direction. So don't be shy.
And Casey, could I ask for folks that are comfortable if they could put like their name and affiliation in the chat, just so we have, you know, an idea of who's in the room?
Yeah, that would be really helpful. Yeah, if you feel comfortable, do you want to just put who you are and who you represent, who you work for, who you volunteer for, advocate for, what you're interested in? Thanks, Brian.
Casey, am I able to touch on something that Adria brought up that I wanted to stress about?
Absolutely.
And I absolutely admire so much that Adria does. She's a phenomenal community member. So Adria had brought up about realtors and as far as our fair housing that we have to attend. And one of the concerns that I have, I sit I used to sit on the local DEI committee for the Realtor Association, and then also the state DEI committee for Washington Realtors. And one of the biggest concerns is that we go to fair housing. Part of our license is learning about that we shouldn't discriminate. But the issue is that when someone does discriminate, there's really, outside of like Adria's organization, there's really no punishment for us. And we've had challenges in reporting issues. There was a Seattle police officer who was recorded. The stranger had covered a story on, he was at a neighbor's house knocking on the door and used some racial slurs, is what the allegation is. And when I read that story, I was so disturbed. Not only one, is it a police officer? And number two, is it a realtor? And I actually took it to the CEO of Washington Realtors and I said, hey, this is a bad look. This needs to be investigated. These are serious allegations. This is somebody that can potentially, like, if he looks at his client, and I'm saying this allegations, I'm not accusing, I'm saying allegations, but the allegation, if this is true and it's proven to be true, this is someone that can stand in between somebody's goal of owning a home, and who knows what those conversations are taking place, and just as a whole, is very concerning. And so I took this allegation to Washington Realtors CEO, and he said, well, it takes a realtor to file the complaint. And so I did file the complaint, but it's kind of in a holding pattern right now. But that was really the first test case that we had as far as really seeing what the fair housing, what we've learned, what kind of teeth the organization has. And there's been other incidents where we've had realtors record videos where they're saying like, hey, don't move to this community because there's gang activity, there's drug use, there's this. And it's like, wait, you're talking about a predominantly Black, historically Black neighborhood. And you're using these terms that are, very disparaging to those areas. And so when I reported to the Human Rights Commission, their response back to me, despite our licensing law, despite that we're not supposed to steer, despite that we're supposed to be fair in all that we do, was, well, this is First Amendment protected speech. And so that's my real struggle right now with all of the fair housing, is that, no matter what we learn, there's really no consequence. And that comes out when it comes to people of color, BIPOC. It's really a challenge. It happens in the LGBTQ plus community as well. That, when someone, and we get this at the Urban League, when someone comes through and they're like, my spouse and we're a same-sex couple. What happens if I see some religious things on someone's wall and I really like the house, but I'm scared to write an offer because we're same-sex couple? And so we see this a lot. And like I said, there's just no consequence to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Very important. And, it's one of those things where it makes sense that this is an issue, but it can be sneaky, right? It's not something that, everybody's thinking about all the time, because there's so many other things to focus on when you're buying a home, even renting a home. And there are so many subtle things that there's lots of unintentional bias. There's also lots of very intentional bias that goes on in people's brains, and it all happens so fast. And not having a net to catch any of this stuff is just wild to me. So.
But it's also like with Adria, if Adria and I were having a conversation, I wouldn't have to tell her what racism looks like. She wouldn't have to tell me what it looks like, because we can probably tell you multiple stories of here's what we've experienced. And a lot of folks think that, well, if they didn't say a slur, or they didn't say it, I didn't do this because you're this, then we think, okay, well, it can't be proven. And there are ways to get around that. And that's the hardest challenge, is really getting through to someone that doesn't want to hear that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And especially if they're in a position of power, if they are, it's a dynamic that just is unequitable. it's just, yeah, it's frustrating. We do have some more time for some more questions. If you've got a question, just raise your hand, take yourself off mute. You can go ahead and interrupt me right now if you've got a question. Otherwise, I did have a quick question for Adria or anybody that wants to talk about this. Reevaluating coordinated entry. That's been kind of a conversation that I've heard a bunch of people talking about. Just trying to figure out how to make it better, more streamlined, and how, I mean, from my experience, I have people calling me. Most of the time, people call me thinking that I'm Tacoma Housing Authority. Um, and so, my mind's always kind of going to how can I point people in the right direction easier, coordinated entry is the path for this kind of information for people, but I'm getting feedback that there's not a lot of response or quick response, and it's kind of confusing, and that kind of stuff. So do any of our panelists want to talk to that a little bit about coordinated entry, anything around that? Aimee, you took yourself off mute.
I'm living coordinated entry day in and day out, and I'm both on the Continuum of Care board as well as lead the coordinated entry subcommittee. And I think that at the end of the day, coordinated entry is the right system to make sure that we are identifying people in the community who need additional support. I think that what's challenging is there's just not enough resources to meet that need. And so people are going into a system where they're navigating probably, a situation where they're not quite getting all of their needs met. And as agencies, we really have to maintain an interconnected web to make sure that as we identify needs, that we're referring people to the right resource and helping them navigate those, systems and support networks. So, we at the Reach Center that works with youth and young adults are really working to do deeper case management, make sure that as we identify young people who are housing insecure, that they get the support that they need in navigating diversion funds or rapid rehousing. Even if we get someone into rapid rehousing, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily ready to live on their own. And so there's a lot of education and support, life skills, how do you stretch a paycheck? How do you shop? How do you own an apartment and maintain it? There's a lot of support that our community needs. And so we've actually just stood up a life skills training program, Casey Life Skills Assessment tool, so that we as caseworkers and service providers can make sure that we can really navigate and support people, moving them from housing insecurity to really stability. And that's, it takes time.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've seen just in, people contact our organization, and, to what you're saying, Casey, too, about, we're one of many stops along the way, and so folks have already reached out to several other organizations at the same time that they're reaching out to us. And a lot of the feedback that we get is, other, particularly around housing providers, but some other social services, but that intake process can be very long, and the callback process can take a long time. And at least in the experiences where we've tried to help clients, as someone was saying in the chat, like the coordination between agencies can be very, very challenging. And it is really frustrating when you're trying to help someone and you're contacting an agency and they're essentially saying that they can't help that person because the person is already being helped by this other agency. and or the way that the dollars are tracking, this person is already essentially being paid for by this other agency, so this new agency can't support them. And we're seeing a lot of that. And we're a high functioning, high capacity organization, and if we're having challenges understanding like the way that care is supposed to be set up for somebody, I don't even know how the person themselves is able to keep track of who's helping them with what, and what paperwork they need to submit to who. And I mean, we have clients tell us all the time, like, I can't do any more paperwork. Like, I don't know who's supposed to help me with what. I don't know how to keep track of everything. The deadlines are too much. Like, it's aggravating, and it's increasing my anxiety, and it is perpetuating my existing medical conditions. And so really thinking about how, that full spectrum of care, like, Aimee, you said that deeper case management, how do we provide case management in a way that the person who's receiving the care actually understands what their care looks like, as opposed to trying to figure out, okay, I'm supposed to see this person on this day, but they're with a different agency, and then I have to go over here and see this person to talk about this specific issue. And it's just, I would like to see better coordination, but with coordinated entry itself, I do think, at least for our agency, we get a lot of not good referrals. And so I think to kind of take a deeper look at the folks who work in coordinated entry, who work at 211 and stuff, just having some regrounding of like what different agencies do, and really figuring out like which agencies still are offering the same services that they were before, because with different funding changes, a lot of agencies aren't necessarily doing the full scope of what they used to do. So
It's quite a web, isn't it? Does somebody else start saying something?
Yeah, I just started
Go
to
ahead, Corey.
respond to the question. So I think for us at the Urban League, it's more of really trying to maintain the partnerships, because a lot of times the African American community relays so much on the Tacoma Urban League, the services that we provide. And so we're really a community resource. And so that's why it's so important that we stay up to date with all the different community partners and resources. And so I just reached out to Adria yesterday and I said, hey, here's someone going through a challenge, and forwarded him the intake information for her. And so it's really important that we do that. And then we have to really be that kind of the catalyst to help them with whatever they're experiencing.
This is a little bit of a tangent. So I apologize if I'm going somewhere. Casey, bring me back in.
Go ahead.
Your question about CE, about coordinated entry, kind of brings up a much larger issue that I'm seeing in Pierce County. And that is that there is just a lack of funding, and Pierce County is severely underfunded through the federal government by comparison of any other county our size. You look at Snohomish County, you look at Spokane County, they're getting significantly more, about 30% more than Pierce County is getting to address homelessness. So when I think that we're looking at some of the issues, a lack of coordination might be what people are feeling, but I think that what they're feeling is a lack of response. And that lack of response comes down to resources. And we have every ability within Pierce County to get more funding from our federal government. And that's what I'm really focused on right now, because I think that we're kind of like pointing to some issues that we're facing, but what we actually need to do is come together to say, how do we make sure that we are in accountable environment that more federal and private investors will invest into our housing system. And I don't know if that's super tangential or if anyone has questions about that, but it's something that I'm really passionate about. And again, maybe an offsite conversation if folks are interested.
Yeah, if anybody has anything to add to that or anything like that, I'm also going to be including all the panelists, contact info, websites, and how to get a hold of them too. So if you're in the meeting today and you are even somewhat interested, even if you don't, like I said, if you don't know what to ask or don't know if, you know, a partnership is worth it for you, I would just reach out. Reach out to these incredible panelists, their work. They can talk a little bit more about what you're asking specifically, you know, if you schedule a little meeting with them. So just remember that you will get contact info for everybody that's speaking today. And even if you don't feel comfortable, you know, bringing yourself off mute at this moment. But these are wildly important conversations. We don't have a lot of answers, and that's why this conversation needs to continue. These discussions need to continue. And so if anybody else has any quick questions or comments, we have another minute, but we will be closing in just a moment.
I'll say something just to on top of what Aimee said is that, so hey everybody, Mark Melsness with the Affordable Housing Consortium chair and also with Spinnaker Property Management. We are a third-party management company in the Tacoma-Pierce County area, and we manage over 1,000 homes, multifamily, smaller multifamily and single family. And you know, the underfunding, the under-resource is an absolute stress level that we deal with, not with Spinnaker and our team members, even though we do, but it's working with caseworkers and program managers because they have a stack of files this high on either side of their chair, which is usually 300 times more caseload than what they were designed to do. And they're doing their darn best to deal with the hottest file that they got to keep that person housed or to get them housed. And on the housing provider side, at least through our experience, where I think the biggest breakdown is, and I'm sharing this on multiple events here this week, is that it's the preserving the housing for the family, the housing stabilization, because there are too many people that have families that have found themselves short on finances to pay the rent, not completely, just short. And because that compounds month over month, then the housing provider starts the eviction process because it's starting to get way beyond what is able to be worked out. And they're not getting the resources to help them keep them in, which is usually less than half the cost than to rehouse after the family has gone through a removal of the house and now into homelessness. And so, Aimee, when you talked about the lack of resources and the lack of money, there's also a lack of identification on where to also add more attention. It's not that it's like someone's not doing their job. It's just we're really concentrated on getting people off the street, which is great. Let's also concentrate on keeping people off the street and in their already existing homes so that it works for everybody. And that makes our community and our city and our county more healthier. You know what I'm saying? And so I'm sharing this with all of you too. If you have some say-so, if you have influence, if you have ability or anything else that I'm leaving out, I would be very happy to meet with you, have a cup of coffee, find out how I can, with my resources and influence, with you and your resources and influence, start a conversation, get things going. We already are, and we've already been around the corner. We're now reacting to something that has already been happening, even before COVID, right? So Amy, I'm gonna get off of my chair now, or stool now also, because we are over time and I apologize.
That's okay, Mark. I appreciate your words. Yeah, we've just got a lot of passion in the room. There's nothing wrong with that. If you need to jump off, go ahead and jump off. I'm gonna let Dawa talk for just a second about the event on Friday. Is that right?
Yes, yes.
Go for it.
Yeah, I'm the executive director of Pierce County Community Land Trust, and we are developing 10 to 20 units of affordable homeownership in a community land trust model. We're going to continue to do that and grow the land trust as an alternative way to maintain affordability and home ownership and shared equity, especially within the Black, Indigenous, and Latinx communities, et cetera. And so we are hosting an event Friday, May 10th, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. at Greater Christ Temple Church, and that's at 1926 South G Street, Tacoma, Washington. I think I put a link or attachment to a message, and you can download that there. I don't really want to take up any more time here because we're already over, but I would love to talk about how the land trust model is an alternative way to affordability and what we could do to partner to make sure that everyone has a decent place to live and receive equity out of their homes.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm excited for that. I live right next to the Temple Church, so I will just walk on over and see y'all there. Yeah, I'll put really quickly in the chat, I'll put the link to RSVP for that if you'd like. There's also a legislative form right after. You'll see that in there as well. But if you're interested. And so we're gonna close out our conversation today. I'm really impressed with how well this went. This conversation was riveting. It always brings up more conversations, always brings up more issues that we need to touch on and continue to work on. But that's why we have these conversations. And I appreciate every single one of you for being in this room, for listening, for participating. Our panelists for being just passionate and action driven and social justice and racial justice driven. We are here with you. We are your partners. We are your friends. So we appreciate everybody's expertise that you offered. We've got lots and lots of work to do. So if you saw somebody in this meeting that you want to connect with, please do. I'll send out everybody's contact information that spoke, and you will receive the recording and all of the necessary links to resources that were mentioned throughout. We do also have some more events for Affordable Housing Week. We're going to have one other panel in about an hour and a half. We're going to have Corey's going to join us back for another panel just like this one. We're going to be focusing on Black home ownership in Pierce County. I'm really excited for that conversation as well. So if you can join us, join us. And if not, we'll see you next time. Thank you guys so
And
much.
don't forget about Thursday, our event.
Yeah,
our
go ahead, Mark.
reception.
You tell them.
You're all here for a passionate reason to make a difference, and thank you for that. We're also asking you to clear your calendar if you haven't already, but don't clear it if you're going to be at the reception on Thursday evening. It's a chance to actually be with the same people in these meetings in person and to, shake hands and to make eye contact and to show physical support for what we're here and what Casey and Amanda have so diligently put together for this whole week. I mean, just mind blowing, and the participation. And we just want to keep it going and have people participate live and in person to show how we're all working together, no matter where we are in our community, to make a difference in affordable housing. Thank you all.
Absolutely. And if you guys have any questions at all between now and even our next event in just a few minutes, please feel free to email me. I'm here for you. And hopefully we'll see you again. Don't take up any more of your time. Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks, panelists. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.